Okay, good afternoon. At least it's afternoon for me as I'm doing this one. I'm not sure what time you'll be watching it, but we'll be continuing in our study of understanding what is learning, what is teaching. If you would remember what we did last week in our last session, after we talked about learning logs, mind maps, Jesus as a master teacher, we talked about understanding learning, and we tried to understand what we mean by learning, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But one of the key things that we saw from last video is the fact that learning is determined by certain factors that individuals, the students themselves experience. And Phil Ress, in his research, he identified what he called the 5 factors underpinning learning. And what he did is he was asking questions from people, how people learn best, and what are the different challenges in learning and all of those ones. And at the end of it, he came up with those factors. And as we continue from there, in a minute, I will look at those 5 things, if you guys are remembering those 5 factors he identified. But what I am hoping for us to do in this session is understanding teaching and learning, where we will define what teaching is and we'll define what learning is, who's responsible if a student is not learning, those kind of things. And in doing that, I'll probably record about 4 videos. And in the first video, we'll be defining, we'll work on it in trying to understand what we understand by teaching. And hopefully by the end of it, you will have your own definition for teaching. But looking back at Phil Ress's factors underpinning learning, he said there are these factors that determine how much people learn. And one of the things is wanting to learn. Does the student want to learn? Is there an eagerness? Is there a desire to it? Is there a need to learn? So the student has to have some kind of a need. When he feels a sense of need, we'll be talking about this, each one of these ones in detail later on. The third factor he identified is learning by doing. People learn as they do it. Fourth is making sense of the things. Does this make sense? Is it relevant? Is it applicable for me in the things that I seek to be doing in life? So this is a question of relevance. Do they see the importance of what they are learning? And of course, that's true for you and me. When we see, when we're learning something and we see its relevance, I'm going to be using it here, using it there. And when you see how it transforms it, then you will be learning. Finally, it is learning through feedback, when people give you feedbacks on it. So these are some of the things. But in this next few sessions, these are some of the outcomes I'm hoping for us. You'll be able to define teaching and learning. You'll be able to distinguish between teaching and learning, what they are. And thirdly, explain why teaching does not always result in learning. And that you and I know. We have sat in many classes where we have been taught, but we have not necessarily learned. And finally, we'll look at some characteristics of adults, and we will be able to relate that to ourselves personally. So going back and looking at what we understand by teaching and learning, this seems to be our experience. We feel like each of the students is like this thing with a funnel on top. So we feel like students are sitting right there in front of us in the classroom with funnels, which is in their case their ears, ready to be poured on, ready for knowledge, information to be poured on into the students. We've sat into those classes where knowledge has been poured into us to the point that we are so full of it. We are full of it. And at the end of the semester, what we do is we get them to spit it out. Now, it doesn't matter whether that has been relevant, appropriate, whether that has been transformative for the students. It's all about pouring the information. Now, that may not necessarily be teaching, and that will be what we'll be arguing for here as we will be discussing. Teaching is not necessarily the transmission of information, but the transformation of our students will be our presentation, our idea. So moving forward, information is other people's knowledge. When a teacher stands before you and tries to give you information, it is something that he knows. Now, it becomes your knowledge when you are able to do something about it. When you take that information and when you are able to apply it and do something with it, then it becomes your knowledge. Until you begin to do something with it, until you're able to do something with that information, then that thing remains to be that person's information. In the Hebrew culture, in the Bible itself, when it talks about knowing, it has to do with us applying it, using it. So I'd like you to take just a minute, pause for a minute, and then write down the definition that you have already written on teaching. How did you define it? Just write it down. Okay, so hopefully you've done that. Now I want you to do this. I want you to write the things, the words that come to you when you think of teaching. What are some of the words that come to you when you think of teaching? Teaching is, and I want you to just write down some of the words that come to you related to teaching. So again, pause the video and then jot it down. Okay, so when we did this in class, the students came up with this ones. When we think of teaching, we think of the teacher, the student, life change, solution the students will have to problems, school, a certain setting, character that will be changed, curriculum that will be used as an instrument, as a tool, giving and receiving, systematic, books, content-wise, helping and guiding the students, equipping the students, communicating knowledge, supporting the students in their learning, transferring of information, skill to the students. It's a process, and informing. So you think of these ones and see which ones you feel like are significant for your understanding of teaching. When you think of teaching, which of these ones are significant for your definition of teaching? Of course, the teacher, the students, these are given. They have to be there. A school environment has to be there. But in terms of character, solution, life change, giving, receiving, transferring, or informing, communicating. So when you think of these ones, which of these ones are key for you in your understanding of teaching when you think of teaching? So think about it. Which of this is it about informing? Is it about transferring? Is it about communicating? Is it about helping and guiding the students? Is it giving, receiving kind of thing? Life change, character. So which of these ones stands out for you? Do you feel like is significant, is important for the way you understand what teaching is? Phil Ress, in his survey, he came up with these ones. These ones are some of the common ones that were raised. So teaching is instructing, passing on information, equipping, explaining, drilling, passing on knowledge, simplifying, informing, preaching, lecturing. So again, with all of these words, I want you to reflect again. Reflect and see what of these ones, which of these ones are significant for your understanding of what teaching is. Is it instructing? Is it passing on information? Is it equipping a student to enable the student to do something? Is it explaining certain concepts? Passing on knowledge, simplifying, informing, preaching, lecturing. Now with these ones, you also think the purpose for it, the purpose for your teaching. You do something, you have certain activity, but to what end? What do you want to see happening in the student? Okay, so think about that one. And now with that, these were some of the definitions. A systematic communication aimed at transforming lives through instructing, explaining, lecturing, and facilitating practice in a systematic and a specific curriculum. Another one is a systematic way of transferring beneficial information in a way that learners understand and bring life change to the learner. The process of equipping students in a systematic way through helping, guiding, informing, and supporting to bring solutions and life change. A systematic process of transferring knowledge and experience in order to bring change. So as you can see, we see a few things here from these definitions that came up from the classroom. So there is an intent to it, a purpose to it, and that is brings some kind of change, bring life change. So what is the intent of teaching? It is definitely a process. It's a process, yeah. It's a process of, in this one, it's a process of equipping the students, of course, in a systematic way. How? Through helping them, guiding them, informing them, supporting to bring solutions and life change. So it is your activity, it is something that you do, but the intent at the end of it is some kind of a life change, some kind of a transformation in the students, is what the definitions came from the classroom. So for a minute, I would like you again to pause, reflecting back to your understanding of what teaching is, not necessarily as information transmission, but what would it be like? So considering all the words that were mentioned related to teaching, I would like you to write down your definition of teaching now. How does this definition compare to the one you had written before? Is it any different from what you had before? It could be the same, and that is fine. If there is an aspect of it that you adjusted, that's great. That means we're learning from it. I'm going to give you a few more definitions here. I would like you to compare your definition that you've written to what I'll be giving you. It doesn't mean they are the right ones. These are different ways in different books educators have written. And so it's just to give you an idea how different people understand it. So I'll show you those ones and I'll discuss in a minute. Now, I want you to notice the focus in teaching. So the focus in teaching, that means the end goal of it. What is the ultimate intent of it? So in terms of, again, discussing here, thinking for you, reflecting on it, I want you to think of your presuppositions, your beliefs, the beliefs that guide your definition of teaching. Because the way we define teaching, the way we actually do teaching, is going to be determined by presuppositions, by what we believe. Unfortunately, some of those presuppositions are going to be determined by our experiences, but the way that we have been taught. Hopefully we can come out of it because not all of us have necessarily learned in the best of the ways. So there might be a better way to do it. So reflect back and see what are some of the beliefs that you have, specifically as you think of content or the teacher and the student. What's your belief about the content? What's your belief about the teacher? What's your belief about the student? Content, we feel like there is this body of knowledge that has to be given to the students. The students have to get it. And so we have this big emphasis on content delivery. So our classes will be all about giving the information to the students, however they get it. On the other hand, there are some other people who will say less is more. If I give the student small amount that they can take and apply and which will be transformative, that is good. And then they allow the students to develop the interest for it, and then they grow from it. They do their own learning. So they don't necessarily feel like all this bulk of knowledge has to be dumped on the students, but the students have to receive a certain amount of knowledge that will be transformative for them. The other one is the teacher. What's the belief you have about the teacher? Is the teacher the one who knows everything, the master in the classroom, and the students are silent, quiet, and he is the only one to be pouring knowledge into us? Finally, the students. What's the role of the student? What do we believe about the student? Do we believe that the student is in a classroom blank, nothing in his head, with no knowledge there, and he just needs to be instructed, he needs to be guided, and he doesn't have anything to contribute? Because if you believe that's how the student is, then the student will be quiet in the classroom, he is not going to be engaged. This is passive classroom. So the teacher will be the one that will be active in the classroom. But if you believe the student is one who already has a certain level of experience, a certain level of knowledge, and he can critically engage with the content and be able to contribute, then that will determine the way you will be teaching. I hope this makes sense. So our philosophy, our belief about content, about the teacher, about the student, they will determine the way we do teaching. So what are the implications of your definition of teaching is exactly what I was talking about. So we need to understand, we need to pause and ask ourselves, what is our understanding of content? When you teach a Bible study, do you feel like you have to give them content, knowledge? Content is important. Do you feel like you are the only one to communicate? Do you feel like the students don't have much to communicate and therefore they need to be receiving from you? Because that understanding of it will determine the way you'll be teaching. If you feel like not all knowledge has to be given, because there is in the world, there's so much content and the students can actually get those ones. And if you feel like I need to give them just a small amount, this amount of content, they don't need to get all of those ones, then you'll be selective which ones are important. If you I think you understand what I'm saying, so you can do the implications there. Some of the definitions here: teaching is providing information to someone. Teaching is the imparting of knowledge or a skill. Teaching is to give someone knowledge or to instruct or train someone. Teaching is understanding, undertaking certain tasks or activities, the intention of which is to induce learning. Teaching may best be described as the organization of learning. So if you see it, it moves from providing information, the idea of providing information, to organization of learning or inducing learning. So if you see the definition here, it moves from a place where the teacher is the master teacher, the all-knowing one, to the point where the students are co-learners with the teacher. So the teacher creates the environment and allows the students to be engaged in the learning process. So according to this definitions here, you have the two spectrums where a teacher is giving information, and the other one is the teacher is one who organizes an environment for learning to occur. It doesn't mean the teacher will not be engaged. He is engaged, but he's thinking of creating that environment where the students are learning, the focus being on the students learning. So as you can see here in our discussion of the focus here, focus of teaching, in the case of instructing, giving others information is the focus, just giving them. I'm instructing, I'm giving them information. Focus on the teacher doing activities. On the other hand, what our desire is organizing activities that would result in learning of the students learning. So finally, let me give us this definition by Jenny Rogers. He says teaching is about learning. I would like that to sink in. Teaching is about learning. You cannot do the learning for someone else. So the students themselves have to be doing the learning. You create that environment, and therefore your task as a teacher of adults or even children, whoever you're teaching, is to become a designer of learning. So what are we as teachers? We are designers of learning. We design the environment where the students will be able to learn. So what is teaching? Teaching has to do with learning. When we talk about teaching, we're talking about learning. If students are not learning, we are not teaching. Okay, we're going to pause here and we'll move on in another video on learning.